What is up, guys? Silver Warrior here, and today I'm going to be discussing how the demand for silver will be changing over the next decade. And to do this, I looked at the major fields that silver is involved with, and I'm basically going to be looking at how those fields are going to potentially grow or shrink over the next 10 years, as well as how silver's use in those fields will grow or shrink. And I'm not going to be looking at supply, but just purely demand, as I'm not trying to calculate what the cost of silver will be over the next 10 years. And in that case, you would need to know the supply to demand ratio. But in this case, I'm simply looking at how the demand itself will increase. And also do note that since it is only a decade, my predictions are going to be pretty small. I don't think that there's going to be a crazy amount of change over the next 10 years or anything like that. I think silver will remain relatively the same. And also do note that this is speculation. This is my prediction as to how these fields will grow and how silver's use will grow based on the current trends. And all that being said, let's get into this video. And the first field we're going to look at is jewelry. Of course, this is a very major consumer of silver, and jewelry itself hasn't experienced insane amount of growth or shrinkage, over the past 10 years or so. So I think that if you look at it in that sense, jewelry is going to be a very stable field that you can see pretty much the same amount of silver being used in year to year. Now, one thing that you do also need to note is that silver is never going to be pushed out of jewelry, because unlike most fields where you want to cut costs by cutting out silver and replacing it with cheaper metals such as copper, in jewelry making, they advertise the fact that there's precious metals in it. So unless you're buying something like a wedding ring or something very high-end, you're probably going to find at least a little bit of silver in the jewelry. Maybe on the necklace, for example, it's just what the clamp's made out of, and everything else is a nicer metal. Maybe it's whatever, but it's probably going to have a small part in mid-level jewelry, stuff that's beyond costume jewelry, but not so crazy to have all gold in it. And also, the silver that is being used in jewelry is going to always be sterling. Maybe it might be coin silver, but that's very rare. And sterling silver is 92.5% silver, with the other 7.5% being metals such as copper, maybe even aluminum, but usually it's going to be some decently hard metals, because silver is very soft in of itself, and the only reason that we don't use pure silver is because in jewelry it would be extremely malleable. So all that being said, though, most of a piece of jewelry is going to be silver if it's made with sterling. So therefore, you can expect that a hefty piece of jewelry is going to consume a relatively high amount of silver and a relatively low amount of another metal, so that overall jewelry does consume very much of our silver each year, and its growth or shrinkage is probably not going to really exist. It's probably going to be relatively the same within a decade from now. Now, same thing pretty much with mirrors. Now, with that, there is going to be a push to get silver out of the use of mirrors, because it would be cheaper to use other metals. But silver is the most reflective element, at least that we know of, that is very commonly available. So that therefore it was going to be used in mirrors because it produces the highest quality reflection out of any metal that we could use mainly. And I mean, I don't really think that there's going to be much of a way to replace it, but I'm not an expert when it comes to mirrors, so there could be a very high possibility that they're looking into other metals that are reflective as well. But silver is just the best thing as of now, and it's not like it's a crazy amount. It's a very small amount of silver that goes into a mirror, so it's not like it's going to make them extremely unaffordable. So really, it's probably just going to be about the same in 10 years from now. With electrical components, however, silver's use in those is going to greatly decline, even though electrical components themselves are probably going to see an increase, as many unindustrialized countries are trying to upgrade. Many second and even third world countries are trying to put in major upgrades to become maybe even a first world country or whatever they're trying to do. You're going to see that field itself grow a lot, but silver's use is declining every day, because it's becoming more and more acceptable to use copper in these components where silver was once used and where gold was once used. Because even silver now is very expensive to use in wiring. And you'll see, if you ever take the time to look at two different auxiliary cords that are in different price fields, you'll notice that a nicer aux cord is going to have gold plating on the end of the cord, as opposed to one that is very cheap is not going to have that gold plating on there. And it's the same thing with silver. It's going to use in higher end electrical components and devices, but where it can be replaced, it will be. So we're probably going to see a decline of silver's use overall in electrical components. And in photography, again, as digital cameras become more and more capable of producing the same quality that a traditional camera would produce, which would require silver, we're going to see a decline of those photos being taken because they're so much more expensive to take than a digital photo at this point that it's going to become more and more obsolete to use those cameras. Now, in the antibacterial field, which is a very small consumer of silver right now, I think we're going to see major growth because I think, at least I personally feel, that there's more and more of a movement towards trying to find safer alternatives to destroying bacteria as opposed to using harsh chemicals, as people are becoming more and more enlightened to how those are basically extremely dangerous to humans and not something that you want to be consuming. So things like chlorine in the water currently is not something that a lot of people are going to want. So I do feel that silver is used as an antibacterial in water and whatever is going to be greatly increased in the next 10 years. I've seen now water fountains that actually do use copper or in silver compounds to actually try to purify the water as opposed to using harsh chemicals. And I do believe that there will be a movement towards using less and less harsh chemicals, and it will be more expensive, I'm sure, to do that, but at the same time, people are going to be more and more willing to pay for that if they think it's going to benefit their health. And finally, one of the biggest consumers of silver is going to be, of course, bullion. And with that, there's obviously no way to push silver out of it because you're buying pure silver. Like, all of this is going to be pure silver no matter what. They're never going to make, unless you get the round is going to be pure silver. So, of course, silver is going to remain the same amount of use no matter what in this field. But what might change is bullion itself, and it honestly depends on the price of silver, how it changes over the next 10 years. Like, if there happens to be a bubble, then there's going to be a lot of bullion being consumed very quickly. I do think that people are becoming more and more enlightened to how basically the US dollar is not worth holding on to, and that you'd be much better off holding on to silver. So I think the demand will kind of slowly increase, but I don't want to be one of those extremists that says, yeah, next year silver is going to be going crazy, there's going to be double the amount of silver bought, because I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's a very bold statement to make when you don't know something like that's going to happen, when you don't have basically a crystal ball to see into the future. You can't say something like that's going to happen. So I definitely don't want to jump the gun and say, oh yeah, silver is definitely going to be, bullion is going to be 99% of its use next year, because I don't think that's fair to say. But I do think that we're going to see a steady increase year after year. We have not seen necessarily silver bullion always go up in terms of being produced, but that's because the biggest produced silver bullion rounds are always going to be things like the American Silver Eagle, and they're not linear in terms of production going up, because the only factor is not just how much money they can make. There's other factors as well when it comes to government minted rounds, but on a grand scale, I do believe that bullion's production will go up and up each year, as it has very much so pretty much every year after year thus far. And with that being said, overall, I think this means the demand for silver might go up or down slightly, but I don't think you should expect in the next 10 years to see a crazy swing either way. And yeah, I do hope you enjoyed this video. That is it for this one. Peace, love, and much respect.